So this is radically distinct from other psychedelic experiences in most cases. Like, as you say, people can have a quote unquote ego death experience and also have a non-dual or mystical unitive experience on other psychedelics, but it's just not as likely. And
Right.
usually, in most cases, I refer to it as non-duality light. Okay,
Yeah.
so for example, with say something like mushrooms or ayahuasca, it's very common for people to say, I felt that I was a part of everything. And I'd certainly had that experience on mushrooms. And you're out walking through the woods and you're looking at the trees and you hear the birds and the insects and you're like, oh my God, we're all part of the same thing. Like we're all connected. So that sense of connectivity still relies on the idea that, well, there's a me that is connected to quote unquote
Yeah.
everything else. Whereas this is the complete dissolution of that sense of me versus everything else, where it all dissolves into this absolute state of unity and there's nothing to perceive there. There is no otherness. So there's no forest, there's no trees, there's no birds, there's no animals, there's no me walking through the forest. It is just the immediacy of this infinite fractal structure of energy that is this vibration of love that is self-aware. And so most other psychedelics don't bring you to that state. And if they do, it's usually for a very, very brief time period. Like it's common for people to say, well, on mushrooms, I had a couple seconds of that, and then I kind of fell back into myself. Or on ayahuasca, I had like a glimpse of that, and then immediately fell back down. So it's very hard for people to sustain because the human ego is an incredibly resilient compilation of these energetic patterns and structures that it is their nature to try and reassemble themselves as soon and as quickly as they can. And also, from my own experience of this nature of the non-dual nature of being, what I concluded pretty quickly was that the resilient structures of the ego are very, very difficult to override. And so, what happens in most psychedelic experiences is what we do is we loosen them, we alter them, we open up new pathways. So, the language that now gets used is that we're disrupting the default mode network.
Right.
Okay. But the key is most psychedelics do not completely override the default mode network. They just alter it and they disrupt it so that people have different experiences. And it was also at this time that I realized that most people were using the term ego death for things that aren't actually ego death, where they're saying,
Right.
well, I didn't know who I was, and I was floating around in the universe and I was talking to these aliens, and that was my ego death experience. That's not ego death at all, because there's still a subject and object that's present.
Yes.
That the ego creates both subject and object simultaneously. So even if you're in an extremely altered state, you don't know who you are, you don't know where you are, but you're interacting with beings or in a realm and you're having ideas about what this realm is and what you're interacting with, by definition, that experience is being filtered and constructed through the ego. So that's why I don't really like to use the term ego death because it gets used so often. And in most, I would say 95% of the cases where people use the term ego death, it's not the full non-dual experience. And so for me, it doesn't really qualify for what I'd want to call ego death, which is what happens when we take enough 5-MeO DMT and also fundamentally choose to release into it. Um, so that's just in a nutshell. That's where 5-MeO DMT is just fundamentally different. And that's also why, again, I chose to call it the God molecule, because this is a molecule that will reveal to you, you're not going to go visit with God. You're going to realize, oh shit, it's what I actually am. And that this is just a filtering down of that universal consciousness into a particular form with a particular identity that allows this window onto the energetic construct that is reality. But behind all of it is this universal actor that's playing all these different characters simultaneously. But in 99.99% of the time, I'm limited to this particular perspective, this particular viewpoint. Whereas there are plenty of cases on 5-MeO where people say, I felt everyone and everything, and I was looking out of everybody's eyes simultaneously. Like that is an experience that people can have. But And they also say, can I sustain that? I say, no, and thank God we can't, because then we'd never get anything done. Like, we have to winnow things down to a particular view so that we can actually interact with reality. So we catch glimpses of that, of sort of the fractal totality of being within the 5-MeO experience. But we should all be grateful that we're not living in that all the time, because that was just completely non-functional.